The voice of sharing. Durian Asean.
Welcome to Durian Asean. I'm Fadhil, your host for today. And today we'll be talking on the topic of ASEAN's democratic outlook, past, present and future. So for this topic, we'll be discussing the contents in 3 segments or 3 episodes, with today's episode being focused on the past aspect of ASEAN, especially in terms of democratic evolution. And for the second episode later, we'll be talking about the present state, and the final episode will be discussing the future of ASEAN democracy. So joining me today are 2 panelists from recognized institutions in Malaysia who are very well versed in the aspect of democracy, human rights and politics. So the first panelist is Mr. Fakhrurrazi Rashid from REFSA, and he's the program coordinator.
Yeah, hello.
And the second panelist is Mr. Ted Lee.
Hi everyone.
Senior research officer from Merdeka Center, and he's very well versed in public opinion, as well as the political sentiments of Malaysians as well as ASEAN. So before we start, maybe we can talk a bit with our panelists and let them introduce themselves and also their background. So maybe we can start with the first panelist, Mr. Fakhrurrazi.
Hi, thank you, Fadhil. My name is Fakhrurrazi. You can call me Bob. I know it's known as Bob because my name is too long. And actually, I'm a program coordinator for Research Social for Advancement, REFSA. We're basically independent think tank which study about urbanization, democracy, reform of political institutions and parliamentary institution itself. So I'm a graduate from University of Malaysia Sarawak in Politics and Government Studies. So that's my introduction on it.
Alright, thank you for the brilliant introduction. I also like to note that Mr. Fakhrurrazi is a regular columnist in Malaysian media outlets with regular articles and also write-ups on the aspect of political economy, philosophy and also development, especially within Malaysia. And going on to the next panelist, Mr. Ted, can you introduce a bit about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Ted Lee. I come from the Merdeka Center, one of the prominent poster in Malaysia. Then my own research interest is about the electoral study, and also as well as the public opinion research. And also recently I take a long time to make a research of the redelineation process, which is happening at 2018. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ted. And let me introduce myself as well. My name is Fadhil Rahman. I'm a senior research officer at Merdeka Center for Opinion Research, and I work together with Ted actually. But my scope is a bit different. I focus on the writing part, and I engage with a lot of ministries on a lot of democratic process and also along the policy levels. And also write a regular column on NST and also the Star on matters pertaining to ASEAN development and democracy as well. So moving on to our topic for today, which is ASEAN's democratic outlook. And we are talking on the past, meaning that we are not really looking at what's going on today, but we are looking at the historical context of ASEAN as well as what has happened to ASEAN before. So the first question will go to Mr. Fakhrurrazi or Bob on the past of ASEAN. So maybe can you share a bit about your thoughts on the historical context of ASEAN politics, particularly before and after the establishment of ASEAN as a regional body?
Thank you, Mr. Fadhil. I think for me, I will not going back a lot on historical context because it's very complex, and I will give some of the short review about ASEAN. So in my thoughts, I remember on November 2007, whereby the 10 ASEAN countries signed a charter providing new legal institution base for organisation. This charter came after 40 years, after the foreign minister of Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Deputy Minister, Prime Minister of Malaysia issued the Bangkok Declarations, establishing ASEAN in August back then in 1967. So the most important difference is ASEAN states are closely related to each other and the region based on the changes or transformation of the great power relation within the ASEAN. So what does it mean when the ASEAN Charter was signed in 2007? So the ASEAN Charter served as a firm foundation in achieving ASEAN community by providing legal status and institutional framework for ASEAN. It also codifies ASEAN norms, rules and values, sets clear targets for ASEAN, and present accountability and compliance. With the entry into force of the ASEAN Charter, ASEAN will henceforth operate under a new legal framework and establish number of new organs to boost its community building process. They have a key principles such as a new political commitment on the top level, new and enhanced commitments, new legal framework, legal personality, and new ASEAN bodies, etc., etc. So remembering the step taken in forming ASEAN back then, it was during the height of the Cold War in Southeast Asia in 1967, when United States looked across the battlefield of Vietnam to its Cold War antagonists that impact Southeast Asia economically and politically. Then you see, after the Cold War, the rise of China as a big player in the region could relatively challenge the United States and the ASEAN or Southeast Asia. Right now, I think ASEAN seek for stability and peace in the region in terms of economics, politics, social makeup by itself. And to be honest, guys, Southeast Asia, this region has overcome a number of crises, although its history, including the communization of Indonesia, civil war in Cambodia, the end of the Cold War, and the ASEAN currency crisis. Now I think ASEAN have developed and becoming more prosperous, but still seek good cooperation and organization. Right now, with a population of 620 million and combined GDP worth over US dollar 2.4 trillions, ASEAN has grown into strong and resilient entity that continues to inspire and to achieve more. And then I think the association has been seeking Southeast Asian integrations, announcing the establishment of the ASEAN community, the first regional community in Asia in December 2015, is one small step with the big dreams, from imagined society to more integration among the region to face more challenging peace that will open doors for ASEAN members to emerge as strong and to compact organization in the globe. So ASEAN geopolitics have changed right now, as we can see, handling towards greater cooperations, based approach to face new challenge of ASEAN, from political context towards more important issues such as economy, political knowledge, and climate change. So this is a new challenge. I will describe a bit more about the economic interest in Southeast Asia right now, in ASEAN. For example, in terms of economic interest, the most important challenge in ASEAN is related to economic interest between the regions. The rapidly growing geo-economics of developing Southeast Asia have become an integral part of the ASEAN regional and global market. By the end of the Cold War, there were 5 industry countries in ASEAN, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines has achieved a sustained level high economic performance based on export growth. But the new challenge of ASEAN, especially facing trade war between China and United States, shows that the region will be benefit more or less. Depends how ASEAN leaders position themselves in more strategic way. I quote some of the thoughts from Tan Sri Rastam Ismail, chairman of Institute of Strategic and International Studies in Malaysia, saying that the next challenge for ASEAN is to sustain the region economic vibrance. While Southeast Asia economics will continue to grow above the global average, they will also have to contend with the rise of protectionism around the world. Southeast Asia, where more than 80 million people will enter the workforce in period of 2040, will not be immune from this new reality. This will have consequences for the Southeast Asian, access to the cost of benefit of the trade. So it's a bit long explanation in terms of economics, but I think we also facing a digitalization industry. Southeast Asia is home to the world's fastest growing population internet users, with more than 125,000 new user forecast to come online every day through year 2020. So thus the cooperation for new industry and digitalizations need to be strengthened to ensure this region will prosper for the future. And next thing is about not just economics, but I think the more important is how the knowledge between ASEAN members is still loose in this current situation from back then until now. The knowledge about each other is still not high among ASEAN countries. There are certainly more people in ASEAN who knows the more international politics, for example, like Barack Obama, Trump, but mostly they don't know who's the president of Indonesia, who's the prime minister of Malaysia. So I think the international mass media also, the base outside the region, continues to be our sources of information, not only about the world, but about one another. But the efforts that we're making in schools, public university and non-governmental organization, NGO, to add more knowledge about ASEAN must be supplemented by more space and coverage in our local media itself. So the last thing that I think is a new challenge that have not been tackled by ASEAN members is about the climate change. Climate change is one thing that is very serious in Southeast Asia. So ASEAN members will need to be more firm to work together to counter the issue of climate change. And majority of ASEAN members have agreed to sign the Paris Agreement, which is very good actually. Tackle global climate change and challenge across the region. And according to the Global Climate Risk Index, 4 of the world 10 countries most affected by climate change are located in Southeast Asia itself. And in 2015, ASEAN Development Bank study estimate that economic losses from climate change could be 60% higher than 2009 estimate if rapid mitigation measures are not taken. This will result in 11% lower gross domestic product GDP across the region of Southeast Asia by 2100. For example, I think the food security is very important in ASEAN. The food security also is threatened because a large proportion of the Southeast Asia workforce is engaged in agriculture, forestry and fisheries, sector which are especially vulnerable to climate change. And rice yield and GDP in ASEAN countries are projected to decline because of this climate change, decline 50% and 6.7% by 2100 respectively. So I think the ASEAN countries should demonstrate their commitment to the climate change, climate mitigation by elevating the issues and taking concrete actions. So I think I'm sorry to take a long time actually to explain about the historical context of ASEAN and where actually are we going now. So,
all right.
Thanks.
Thank you for the brilliant explanation, Mr. Bob. Can I call him Mr. Bob?
Yeah, sure. You can call
thank you.
me.
Thank you. So it's a very detailed explanation and discussion on the aspects that are quite relevant of ASEAN, especially if you're talking about the progress of ASEAN since its inception in 1967. So I'm quite impressed with some of the points raised by Mr. Bob, but maybe we can discuss that in detail afterwards. But going back to one of the points mentioned related to the knowledge of Asian society, especially related to education and so on. So Bob mentioned about the importance of stimulating greater spread of knowledge among people in ASEAN. So I'd like to continue on this discussion by going to talk about democracy. Democracy particularly in terms of public education, especially among the youth as well as maybe the senior citizens. So maybe, Mr. Ted, can you just explain a bit, is democracy the best way of governing a nation in ASEAN? Because right now we can see that different countries in ASEAN have different ways of administrating the nation. For example, in Malaysia, we have our own way, which is parliamentary democracy.
Yeah.
But in other nations, they would like to propose their own way of governing. So what kind of democracy works best here in ASEAN? Your thoughts?
Yeah, first I would like to mention a problem in the country, in the work now. A lot of people really realize the democracy are facing the challenge. So the people will ask the question: is the democracy still the best forms of the government? I'll give you an answer: yes, it is. Although we can see a lot of problems, democracy creates a lot of problems, but we still, if we compare to another kind of regime, we can realize another regime have more problem than the democracy. So yes, the democracy is the best form of the country to every country in ASEAN. Yes, so I think let us have a flashback to the development of democracy in the last 30 years. Since the end of the Cold War in 1990 and the collapse of the Soviet Union, so we can see a very big wave of the democratization around the world, and it is very apparently at Eastern Europe, which is the former Soviet country. Although this wave is not giving the direct effect to the Southeast Asia, but we can see some externality which was spreading to Southeast Asia at late 1990. When 1998, you can see the Suharto, the dictator in Indonesia, have his resignation, and Indonesia has a new government after 40 years. And also in 1999, we are very familiar that the Reformasi movement in Malaysia, which caused Barisan Nasional lost a lot of support. Although they still won election, but they lost a lot of votes in 1999 election. So this kind of electoral result brings the Malaysian have a feeling that the change the government is impossible. The democracy in Malaysia is possible. Although we only can see the result of this democracy after 20 years, which is a 2018 election result. Yes. But in this 30 year, we can see the wave of democratization is improving. But in this few years, we can see some retreat is coming. Like the 2016, when the Donald Trump have a very surprising victory in the United States presidential election, and also another very surprising result at the UK when the British vote at a referendum said yes, they want move out from EU, European Union. And also we can see some right-wing, far-right populisms, the democratic politics is spreading in Germany and also in France as well. This is a very severe challenge to democracy because in our concept, like UK, United States, Germany, and also France is the most classical and longest ever democracy regime in our world. But they are facing the problem and they were facing the challenge. So this of course will bring some externalities to another region, such as the place that what we are concerning, Southeast Asian. But Malaysia is a kind of outlier because at the wave of the retreat of the democracy, Malaysians still enjoy their very surprise election result at last year, which is we have a new government first time in 60 years. So I think Malaysia could be a lesson and could be an example to the rest of the Asian country that the democracy still is the best forms of the government. Then this could be an incentive. This could be a good example to the other country in Southeast Asia. As we know, Southeast Asia has a lot of country, although they have the election, but they are not treated as the democratic country. They are more favored by the work scholar. They are the electoral authoritarian country, as well as just like the Malaysia before 2018. Probably after that we can talk about what is the definition and what is the insight of electoral, the authoritarian, that the leader can manipulate the election result. Yes, although we can see there's this is what I'm focusing in this few years. The political leader can manipulate the election result by legally manipulate, not the illegally manipulate. Illegal manipulate, probably we can talk later. Illegal manipulate the electoral result is by vote buying to make the manipulation of the vote counting. But in Southeast Asia, what we call the electro-authoritarianism is like Singapore and Malaysia. They can legally manipulate the election result before the election, which like the electoral redistricting, how to get wars of your opinion. Like Cambodia, we have a very good example in Cambodia. Aung San, he deregister and prosecute his political opponent before the election, as well as like the Thailand, they do a similar thing. They have recently they have their election, but before the election, they can deregister some political parties. So this is the what of all of this thing is the challenge of democracy. So how to overcome this kind of challenge? So I think Malaysia, once again, I want to mention we have a very good opportunity. We experienced the first transformation of power since last year. So we can this is already open and a policy window to each of us to push the reform agenda. So I think at the future this could be a very good example to the other authoritarian country to follow as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ted, for the clear explanation on democracy. I think it's very comprehensive. But just now, Ted, you mentioned a bit about the context of democracy in ASEAN, whereby you talk about the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and also the externalities, or rather the external impact of outside developments toward ASEAN, especially towards Malaysia. So when we talk about the current issues, for example, given that you have studied in Taiwan, so there is some sort of conflict between US and China, and between China and Taiwan, as we understand. And Taiwan, with their President Tsai, having established very good relations with US, is creating a challenge whereby China is stipulating or explaining their displeasure with the act, because it may seem to downgrade, or it may seem to portray a negative image of China, and also it's interfering with the global order. So some say President Tsai is not doing the right thing because it's disrupting democracy, not just among US and China, but also in ASEAN as well. So my question is this towards that. How could ASEAN manage this kind of interference from outside, given that we are considered small by the superpowers, but at the same time they are still trying to come in to bring in their democratic ideas to ASEAN? Maybe, do you have some comments on that?
I think Taiwan is a very successful democratic country. When they first time they faced their democratization, since they have a direct election 1996, the first time they changed the government 2000. I think this could be a good example to the Asian country to follow as well. But of course, we know that Taiwan have its problems. That is, we call the triple corner relationship, which is the U.S., Taiwan, and China. So China, of course, we know the Tsai Ing-wen government now in Taiwan is pro independence political party. So the one most important factor which they can differentiate with the People's Republic of China, the Communist China they call, is Taiwan. They advocate the principle of democracy. So I think this could be a good example that we can follow as well in Southeast Asia. Then of course we know there's a lot of background of Taiwan is quite different, not only small different but big different with the country in Southeast Asia. But something which they have a clean election. How do they avoid the election bribery? Of course, we know in 1970 and 1980, Taiwan is facing the very severe electoral bribery as well. So how they overcome this problem? I think at the future, the country in ASEAN, if they want to overcome this kind of problem at the election at the future, Taiwan could give the good example to the country at Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you, Ted. One final question to Mr. Bob. Maybe you can answer in about 1 minute or so.
Yeah.
Just now you mentioned about one of the biggest geopolitical challenges for ASEAN is about sustaining economic vibrance. Sustaining meaning that we want to continue the success for a long time. But are we progressing in the right direction as for now? Your thought in maybe 1 minute?
Yeah, my thought is very simple. I think I have explained those points about the economic sides, where we can see the ASEAN is progressing, but sadly, the democratic practices, mostly I will stress on this good governance in ASEAN members is very important, which is we have this prosperous economics, but the democratic process is not going at the right track. So I think the ASEAN members should have put some commitments, some respect to the ASEAN Charter itself, to implement how to become a good government, to respond, to become a more responsive government to the people in ASEAN, especially to secure the human rights and human security. So
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bob. So we are running out of time for this episode. So maybe some final words from Mr. Ted on this topic of democracy and also the prospects of ASEAN going forward.
Yeah, right. Just I want just want to continue what I'm talking just now. Is my point is although the democracy is facing a very serious challenge now, not only that is not only happening in Southeast Asia but across the country. But the leader of Southeast Asian should concern. I think this is just a period because we just get some bad experience. That the populism is rising. So of course this is one of the most challenge to the democracy as well. In this few years we can see the populism also is rising in Malaysia and the rest of Southeast Asian country as well. Especially is I think those populism is more slightly different with another region such as US and Europe. The Southeast Asian problem is more complicated, which is probably is the ethnic populism and also as well as religious populism. So if this thing cannot cover by well method, I think we will face another big trouble in the future. So this should be the very important matter handled by the government in the country in Southeast Asia at this period, I think.
I agree with you. Final words from Mr. Bob?
I think I will agree with what Ted said just before. The continuation of keeping the democracy works is very important. So I hope that everyone collectively have a commitment in democracy in ASEAN.
All right. Thank you to Mr. Ted and Bob. I think it's a very fruitful discussion and it's worth exploring what these two panelists think about in our next episode, whereby we're going to discuss the current state of affairs in ASEAN in more detail, whereby we look at the current issues and of course we are going to try to come up with good resolutions for the benefit of the whole of ASEAN. So that's it for this episode and we'll meet you again later. Thank you.